Hello and welcome to Pickleball Therapy, the podcast dedicated to your pickleball improvement. Hope you're having a great week, and also hope you have joined our mini-series. We're in the middle of our system mini-series, and always trying to share the good information that will radically change your game. We're not about sharing, small tips during the mini-series. We're about sharing, paradigm shift kind of things that will radically improve your game. Anyway, I wanted to talk this week about two things. One is about this concept of finding your pickleball GPS. And I think it'll make a lot of sense as we go through it. But, trying to find that GPS that'll get you where you want to go. A super important concept is a concept that CJ and I have been talking about over the last few weeks in terms of trying to better explain the improvement path, right, to pickleball players who are keen on improvement. And as I've said before on this podcast, if you're listening to the Pickleball Therapy podcast, you are generally not a casual pickleball player. No criticism of them. It's perfectly fine to be a casual pickleball player, but generally speaking, when you're on here and I'm talking to you on here, you're not one of those. So we're talking to you about things that are more relevant to where you're at. And then, we're going to talk about the GPS system. I'm going to tell you what it is. I'm going to tell you how I used it this last weekend when I played, and I will share with you how you can use it. And then in the riff, I'm going to talk about looking for a new answer. In our recent communications, we have a system class that is basically coming to term, if you will. So the 12-month milestone they've hit, and they're some of the players in there are considering, do I commit to myself to another 12 months inside the system? And it's some of the questions are interesting because it's the normal struggle that pickleball players have in terms of what's next, what's the right answer, right? What's the new thing I need? And so I'm going to frame it out in terms of looking for a new answer, looking for the solution, right? And how sometimes it's more of looking inward than looking outward for that. So in the riff, we're going to talk about that, but let's go ahead and start off with the GPS. So stay tuned for the podcast.
If it's March, you know what that means. It's time for our March System mini-series. During our 3 workshop mini-series, we are going to share with you the most important concept in pickleball and how to use it. We're going to share with you the most important shot in pickleball and why you should focus on it. And we're going to share with you why you're popping the ball up and how to minimize pop-ups in your game. There's no cost to attend the mini-series, but you do need a ticket. I'll put a link down in the show notes so you can get your ticket and reserve your seat. Stop guessing what you need for your game and rise above the YouTube noise. Learn what you need to realize your full pickleball potential at our System mini-series. I'll see you there.
You probably already know what a GPS is, Global Positioning System, right? It tells you where you are in the world within a pretty reasonable degree of accuracy. Sometimes they get a little wonky, but usually they have a pretty reasonable degree of accuracy to them. And, I was thinking about a pickleball journey, right? When we're on a journey as pickleball players, when we're trying to get somewhere, right? If we're on a journey, if we're trying to improve, if we're trying to make changes in our relationship with the game. So the idea of expressing the path or the how to get to where we want to go through GPS resonated with me, right? It was something that I said, that makes a lot of sense. And what I started thinking about was, how when you have a you put in an address in your phone, and oftentimes GPS will give you like 3 options, right? They'll pick one, they'll recommend one, but then they'll have like 2 other options, and you can decide whether you want to go on this one, on that one, or on that one. And it got me thinking about how pickleball players, we may end up at the same place in terms of our improvement, right? So we're at point A right now. We want to go to point B, right? Whatever point B is for you, depending on where you're at and what your aspirations are. And so you're heading towards point B. And the question is, which route are you going to take to get to point B? And there's a question also as to whether you're going to get to point B based on the GPS you're using, and I'll get into that in a second. But first, let's talk about, the path that we take. Generally speaking, I don't know about you all, with some exceptions, generally speaking, when I am headed to a location, I will select the route recommended by the GPS system. And I found the GPS system, and I'm sure you have too, to be remarkably reliable in terms of the amount of time it's going to take and even your estimated time of arrival. Pretty accurate. And so I will generally select the one that is offered to me by GPS. Now, why do I do that? I do that because my objective in most situations is to get there in the least amount of time possible, right? Time being our most valuable commodity. The only exceptions I would say are like, there's times that we travel from Tampa to Orlando to visit our grandkids, and that drive on I-4 is just god-awful. And so sometimes we will select a route that is maybe 10 minutes longer or 15 minutes longer, but it's a more scenic route. So that's a specific decision we're making. But we understand that we are bucking the GPS, the GPS map suggested route. If we wanted to get there in the quickest time possible, then we would select the GPS recommended route. And so as pickleball players, again, let's say you want to go from where you're at now, which we'll call point A, to a point B, which is a version of a pickleball player that you are in sometime in the future. And the question you have to ask yourself is, how do I get from A to B? Right? What's the way I get there? And there's a variety of ways to try to get there. In terms of paths, you could, for instance, you could do YouTube, buy some books, take some local instruction. I guess listen to local players if you want to, at your courts. Sometimes that's hit or miss. And then the idea is, okay, I'm going to follow a path to get to point B. What we would suggest to you is that, there's a more direct route, and I'll address that at the end of this part of the podcast. And it has to do with our pickleball system, and I'll explain how that's the most direct route when we get there. But basically, regardless of which route you decide to take or how you decide to get there, if your objective is, I am a player at position A along my path, and I want to get to position B along the path, right? I want to, and that presumably is some sort of improvement, some sort of better understanding of the game. You need to ask yourself, how am I going to get from A to B? And we suggest to you that thinking about it in terms of GPS makes a lot of sense. Now, I said I was going to address the potential of not getting to B, and let me address that. And I'll share with you some history of GPS that might be interesting to you, and it'll help explain. So when GPS was first thought of, right, it's a triangulation done by satellites, et cetera, in terms of your location. And I'm very generally describing it. And anyway, so the idea is the satellites tell, okay, here's where you're at, or here's where your device is at. And there was a problem originally, and the problem was that time is different in a satellite than it is on Earth. Now that's a whole other conversation about theory of special relativity and the how time travels slower the faster the thing is moving. In this case, the satellite. And it took scientists some time to figure that out, and they I forget the scientist's name that did that, but it was pretty cool. They figured out the solution of the time lag in the satellite to Earth, right? So when GPS first started, it actually was pretty inaccurate, right? It would just have you off by a magnitude of order of where you're at. And so my thinking is that is a lot of times that's what happens when we rely on faulty GPS systems, right? Or faulty apps, if you will. So, imagine that you downloaded an app to your phone that put you that said, okay, go this way to get to where you're going. And when you got there and the app said you've arrived, you're not even close to where you're supposed to be, right? Well, that's not a very good app. That's not a GPS app I'm going to rely on. And so what happens is when we're doing this, through YouTube, through, piecemeal approach of people telling you stuff at the courts and things like that, that's guesswork. That's basically like, well, maybe the GPS will get me there, and maybe I'll end up in a whole different county or a whole different state than where I wanted to end up. And so, when we look at something like the pickleball system, the pickleball system is like a GPS, really. I mean, it's what tells you, I'm here. You'll find out where you're at from a success path, and it says I'm at point A, and I want to move forward in my improvement. So I'm going to follow the GPS to get me to where I want to go, and I'll follow it as far as it'll take me over the next 12 months of my committed work. And I'll give you an example of how I used that GPS system recently, right? Literally the GPS system. That's what I used for my play. And I was playing and I was doing some things that were causing some errors in my shots. And what did I do? I applied the knowledge from inside the pickleball system to improve my shots. to change some of my shots. I improved my swing and I improved my trajectory, right, of my shots so that I could avoid some of the errors that I was making. Now, I'm a senior pro pickleball player, right? I'm ranked 5-0 and change, right? Somewhere in there. So, but I can tell you that I use the same information that's inside the pickleball system that is available to a beginner player or a 3-0 or a 3-5 or a 4-0. It doesn't matter the level. I use the exact same information. And why? Because that's my GPS, right? That's what tells me, that's what gets me back on course, right? When I'm off course, when I'm doing stuff that I'm like, what is all that about, right? What in the world am I thinking there? I can come back to the fundamental concepts that are the bedrock of the system and say, okay, let's get back on track here. And it puts me back on track. And so that's how I use the GPS, right? And frankly, it's the same thing that you could do, Now, whether you want to use a system or not use a system, that's entirely your choice, right? I'm not, we're not here to twist arms and to force people to do things they don't want to do. But what I do recommend is that, what's your GPS? How do you check yourself? What do you know what's your baseline, right? How do you know to say, okay, I'm going to, this is what I'm doing wrong and this is what I need to fix, or this is the actual thing that I need to work on if you don't have a GPS system. So if you're keen, and again, if you're listening to the podcast, we generally give you credit for, wanting this sort of growth in your game. You're a curious pickleball player. You want to grow. You need to ask yourself, how am I going from point A to point B? What's guiding me there? And if I don't have a GPS, or you can also think about it more old school. We think about it in terms of a compass too. A compass tells you north, south, east, and west, and you can orient yourself from there. Okay, I'm here. I need to head this direction. This is where I'm going to walk based on my compass. And if you don't have a compass or a reliable compass, then it's very hard to navigate. And so that's something that you'll need to ask yourself in terms of what is my GPS or what is my compass? And if you don't have one, highly recommend you check out the Pickleball system. As I've said before, and as I'll repeat here, there is simply no obstacle to joining the Pickleball system, to enrolling in our class, if that's something that you want to do. CJ and I have made it abundantly clear in our mission and in our implementation of the system that there is no obstacle to a pickleball player who wishes to grow in the sport to join us inside the Pickleball system and get that GPS. All right, in the riff, I'm going to talk to you about looking for the new answer, trying to find the new answer and see if that's the solution that's going to help you. So stay tuned for the riff.
Most pickleball players spend a lot of time thinking about and comparing pickleball paddles. But you know what's more important than a pickleball paddle? Your shoes. Are you wearing the right kind of shoes to play pickleball in? If you're not sure, consider trying out shoes that are designed and made specifically for pickleball. Tie roll shoes are the shoes that CJ and I both wear out on the pickleball court. Remove any doubt about whether the shoes you're wearing are right for pickleball. Check out tie roll shoes. I'll put a link in the show notes. Protect your most valuable asset out there, your body, with the right shoes. Wear the right shoes and play longer on the court.
As I mentioned earlier, our March 2022 system class is at its 12-month milestone. And the way the system works is when you enroll in system class, you are making a 12-month commitment. So it's 12-month commitments. Then at the end of 12 months, you make a decision whether you want to continue inside the system, make another 12-month commitment or not. That's entirely up to the student's choice or the player's choice. And so we've been getting this question in this group. And this is not a criticism of anybody, folks. This is a perfectly fine question to ask. It's perfectly understandable why this question would be asked. But we wanted to, it made us think about what is it that's engendering this question, and what's a way to help respond to the question in a constructive way. And the question is basically like, okay, so what now? In other words, like I've been through the system, right? Let's assume that the player asking the question, the student has been through the entire course, and so they're saying, what now? And the way that I interpret that is basically it's a search for what's new. In other words, like, what's the new answer that I haven't already heard? And, there's two ways that I want to address this. One is, and I've said this in different ways before, but pickleball is pickleball. In other words, the pickleball that you play is the same pickleball that I play as a senior pro player, is the same pickleball that the best players in the world play. And frankly, it's the same pickleball that the brand new players that just came to the courts are playing. It's the same sport. And the framework of the sport is the same for all of us. The objectives are the same pretty much for all of us. The fundamentals in terms of how we execute shots are the same for all of us, right? And so this idea that there's like another, something behind door number 3 that is the actual answer that I need, is really there's a fallacy there, right? In other words, like trying to search for that, there's nothing behind door number 3 that's going to help you faster than what's already behind door number 1, right? In this case, it's the system, because that's what these students are trying to decide, whether they continue inside the system or do something else. And I want to be clear, if there's something else that works better for a student and for a player, great, then do that, right? But what I'm trying to suggest to you is there's not like another answer that changes from what's inside the system. Now, what does change, and this is a kind of interesting thing to wrap your head around. What does change is the player. If you think about yourself, whether you've been inside the system or not, right? Think of the player you were when you first started playing, whenever that was, however many months or years ago that was. Think about the player you are today. Are you the same person or the same player? And I'm going to guess the answer is no. I'm going to guess that your understanding of pickleball is different. Your ability to see the game has changed, right? And so, what happens is when you go through the system the first time that you do it, right? You're player A at point A, as I was talking about earlier with the GPS, right? So you're the player who's standing at point A. When you go through the system 12 months later, start again 12 months later, you are now the player at point B. That's a totally different player. So what changes as you progress through your journey is you as a player and also your opponents as players. Because sometimes what you'll notice is, the return of serve or the volley or whatever that you had that worked fantastic when you were playing 3-0, it doesn't work so well against the 3-5s anymore. Or 3-5s, when you were 3-5 and now you're playing 4-0s, et cetera. So you change and your opponents change. But the game and the relevant information that will help you play your best pickleball doesn't change. And so that's the trick, right? That's kind of the illusion that happens is I'm looking for something new because I'm a different player without realizing that what you're looking for is the same thing that you had, right? That was inside the system basically. But what's changed is you as a player. So, as you progress as a player, consider revisiting information that you've already garnered or reviewed and apply it now that you're a player at position B. And I can tell you personally, that's what I do. I'm a much different player than I was today than I was last year, the year before, et cetera. But I still go back to the basics, to the fundamentals, to check myself and to make sure that I'm playing my best pickleball by using those concepts in my play. All right, folks, that's this week's podcast. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. As always, please rate and review it wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you enjoy the podcast, please share it with your friends. If you're listening to this podcast when it publishes, we still have two more workshops of our mini-series, the one on Sunday and the one next week, either Tuesday or Wednesday. If you go to the link in the description, you can still register for the remaining workshops inside the mini-series. And if you decide to make a commitment to yourself for the next 12 months to improve your pickleball play, remember, you can join us for the March 23 system class. Again, there is simply no obstacle to joining the system class other than your decision to whether you want to improve as a pickleball player. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time on Pickleball Therapy, the podcast dedicated to your pickleball improvement. Be well out there.